Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LCS week number 2 overview and analysis video in the summer split. This is coming out a day early. Typically speaking, this would be the LEC's day, but we're going to flip them around this week because the LCS is playing on Thursdays and Fridays, so I want to make sure I get the video out before tomorrow. That being said, things will return to normal, obviously, once the LCS schedule goes back to normal and they start playing on weekends again. But at least for this week, we're getting the LCS first, and I'm excited to talk about it. If you want to know my thoughts on everything that's happened in the LCS up until this point, that's week 1. That's my preseason analysis. You can check out the playlist up in the iCard that's going to have both of those videos linked in there. I highly recommend you check that out before watching this one, or else you're going to be a bit confused about some of my takes and opinions, but we'll go through all of them in this video as well as we talk about all 8 teams. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will, of course, also be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 8, talking about what teams I think are doing well, what teams aren't doing well. Spoiler alert, this week was pretty chalk. I don't think there were a ton of upsets. I think some people are going to be surprised by the outcomes, but my power rankings got all 4 of these series correct, and so we'll go ahead and talk about that as we continue to go along. A little bit of a spoiler there, but without further ado, let's get right into it. Of course, 2 days to cover 4 series in total. That means starting off with day number 1, and we kicked day 1 off with a battle between 2 teams that did win. In week number 1, it was Cloud9 taking on Immortals, and as expected, Cloud9 is going to be able to get the job done here in this first series. You know, Immortals was very good in that first one against Shopify. Shopify looks like they are a complete disaster right now. We will talk about that later on in the week, but Cloud9's a bit of a different story. I don't think anybody expected them to come into this series and win it. There were times where they were kind of competitive, I guess, like not completely inept, but for the most part, that was all on one player. Everybody else was really struggling, and I shouldn't say one player, one lane in particular. Everybody else was really struggling. The top side of the map just could not hold up for Immortals. They were not on the same page. They were not even remotely good enough to be able to go up against Cloud9, and that really was the difference. When you're looking at the main thing that separated these 2 teams, it's Cloud9 is incredibly talented, even if they struggle in terms of their execution in the mid game and, you know, always translating those leads into something big, and Immortals is not that talented. They are a team that, if they're going to win games, if they're going to upset teams, they're going to have to do it off the fact that their communication and their macro is better, and they just didn't have that. They lost so hard in the early game in both of these games and just got completely destroyed. So we'll go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Blabber. I considered a couple of players for this one. I actually think Cloud9 in general just played well across the board. I know that there is some concern around Berserker and Vulcan. They have been the weak link of this team so far in 2024. The spring split was really not kind to them, and I think that there is real concerns about whether or not they can get back to that elite territory, but they've actually been significantly better, in my opinion, at the start of the summer split here. I still think they're going to have a bit of a negative reputation because of how things went in spring, and they haven't exactly destroyed that narrative yet, specifically Vulcan, who I am concerned about, but they've been fine to start off this split. I think because Tactical and Ole were really good on the other side of this matchup. Some people are going to look at Berserker and Vulcan and say, like, oh, you can't even beat them, whereas I think it was just a bit of a, you know, difference in play styles. Like Sen and Nautilus, yeah, they were going to be a little bit low resource. They're not exactly going to shine in the same kind of way that you maybe would expect a player like Berserker to shine, but generally I thought they were fine. But Blabber really was the star. Jungle Gap was massive in this series. I think especially game number 1 on the Karthus was really impressive to me for Blabber. He's kind of notorious for not being particularly good at this champion on his streams, and so it's really funny to see him pull him out in LCS and have it really work. I think the game 1 draft obviously is hugely in favor of Cloud9. I don't really know what Lee Sin Top does in particular in this series. Castle from that KT Rollster system that really loved to incentivize Lee Sin Top. I remember Rascal, you know, right around the time that Castle was playing for KT Rollster, you know, playing a ton of Lee Sin Top. I'm sure he learned a lot from Rascal in that regard. It's definitely a comfort pick in that area, but it did not work in game number 1. The Karthus, the Gnar were able to take full advantage of that, and in game number 2, it was just a little bit more of a like clean, close, safe game. There really weren't a lot of negative impacts. I think Mask obviously was just permadove in the mid lane, and things became a lot more difficult there, but that's on Blabber. That is a plus to Blabber. I think he was really good in this series, and he was really good in their first series against Dignitas as well. Just a lot of ups to Blabber. I think he's playing incredibly well at the start of this split. Thanatos also really settled in here. Castle had a pretty good week number 1, considering, he did get Skarner twice, and so it's really not a perfect encapsulation of maybe his skill level, but Thanatos looked really strong here in his second series. Wasn't quite perfect in series number 1, but we always knew it was going to take some time to get him adjusted. He's used to being a super high resource top laner in the LCK Challengers League, and that's just not the kind of role that he's going to have to fill here for Cloud9. You have a ton of high resource players elsewhere on the map, specifically Jojo Pyun, who wants a lot of those resources in the mid lane, and Chovy, as a lot of people like to call him. I will call him that. Very similar playstyle wise, even if obviously, the skill level is a little bit different. But Thanatos is, I think, getting more used to just playing the 1v1s on the top side, being given the opportunity to flex his mechanical skill over his opponent because he's not pulling a ton of attention. Other junglers want to try to match Blabber and Jojo and Berserker, and also he's not pulling attention from his own team. You can just kind of get these isolated matchups, which I think will generally help him in the long run. That being said, the Gnar looked a lot better than the Renekton. I don't think the Renekton was bad. I just think he played the Gnar really well. So, I think everybody on Cloud9 kind of doing their jobs. Blabber and Thanatos really stood out. I think Berserker and Vulcan were better than people are going to give them credit for. Jojo Pyun maybe a bit too aggressive at times, especially on the Yone, but you can live with that. I think generally Cloud9 looked pretty good here, even if their flaws are definitely not completely gone just yet. And then for Immortals on the other side, this is not a good team. Don't let the fact that they beat Shopify Rebellion fool you. This is still a team that is projected to be in the bottom 2, as I have them in my power rankings at number 7. I had Cloud9 at number 1. Neither of those are, I would say maybe Immortals at 7 is a popular opinion. I think people anticipated them being a bottom 2 team even after the Shopify win, but yeah, they have real issues. This team is just not talented enough to go up against anybody who has like real elite talent, which I would say the top 4 to 5 kind of have in the LCS right now. Armeo is going to get dead of the series. He has just been horrible for Immortals. I will continue to die on the hill that if he was on a better team, I think his playstyle would shine more, but Armeo is not the kind of player that can play for a bad team. We've seen it at the LCS level for multiple years in a row now, where it's a bit of a difference, right? When Armeo has lanes that he can play towards and, he can be that facilitator, he looks good like he did in the Challengers League, but when he doesn't, when he has losing lanes and when he has to go and be kind of the carry and actually apply a ton of jungle pressure against a player like Blabber, he's just not the kind of player that's going to be able to do that, and he really struggled in this matchup because of it. The Maokai was not looking great. I do think the rest of this team also looked kind of poor. Castle got completely destroyed when he wasn't on Skarner. Again, the Lee Sin not working in game number 1. Poor Mask was dove over and over and over again in the mid lane in game number 2. And Tactical and Ole were definitely the bright spots. Tactical does a really good job of trying to pull back fights. I think generally speaking, he's an AD carry that can succeed in this league. I think this is a surprisingly good quote-unquote situation for him because he is the kind of player that I think would want a lot of the team's resources. And obviously, it's not a good situation in terms of him winning because he's not going to win on this team, but in terms of him being the number 1 option, he wouldn't get that on a lot of other teams, and I think that his playstyle looks a little bit better because he is the number 1 option. Ole, I think, was generally fine in this series, certainly wasn't the biggest problem that Immortals had, but if you're relying on Tactical and Ole to be your best players, you're just not going to be anything other than a bottom 2 team. If you don't have anything else on the top side of the map, there is no way that you are going to be able to consistently do anything at this level, so they moved to 1-1. Looks like week 1 was just a Shopify Rebellion thing rather than an Immortals thing, and then Cloud9 with the nice win. Again, I'm not giving up on this team. I still really believe in them. They were at number 1 in the power rankings at the beginning of the year for a reason for me. I still think they have the highest ceiling of anybody in the LCS, even if Team Liquid has the highest floor. It's going to be a fun conversation, but 2-0 is exactly where I thought they'd be after the first 2 weeks. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and this was probably the matchup I was most looking forward to here in week number 2. It's 100 Thieves taking on Dignitas, and Dignitas is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. I definitely saw quite a few comments elsewhere on the internet that were talking about how 100 Thieves was without a doubt a top 3 or 4 team in the LCS, that there really is no competition. I kept them at number 5 because I didn't think they were better than Dignitas. I didn't feel like after watching how Dig played in week number 1 that I would have expected them to win this series, and that kind of played out. Dig is just a better team, and we saw that here in both of these games. Quite frankly, Dig was just better across this series. They were more clinical, they had better macro, they had better micro execution, and this was kind of the issue for 100 Thieves as we went further and further along in the spring split, where they got into playoffs, and, they did really well in the regular season, but they weren't this, perfect team. They didn't have this, mechanical ceiling that a lot of the other teams around them had, and I think a lot of people saw that performance as a bit disappointing. I think 4th place was relatively good for 100 Thieves considering what the expectation for this roster was, but I do think that with Dig getting better, them dropping to number 5 in these power rankings, I think that that's a pretty realistic thing to put, and I think, it looks pretty good. It's aged pretty well that I kept them at 5 and I kept Dig at 4. Player of the series is no-brainer. Gonna go to Sven. I was really high on Sven going into the split because every single time he's played AD carry in North America, he has been one of the best AD carries in North America. It's not even been remotely close. I just remember being a huge huge advocate for Sven on this channel over the last couple of years that he was playing ADC before he role swapped to support, and a lot of it was just like, he's the most consistent ADC that you have. Like, there really aren't a lot of players that are going to give you the same week in, week out output that Sven is going to give you, and that has absolutely translated here to Dig. I think a lot of the positives have, kept from his time as an AD carry. I think he's significantly better as an ADC than he was as a support. Not that he was a horrible support. I think he learned the position really well. He got better year over year, but he is truly an elite level AD carry. He could be the number one ADC in North America if things continue to go. He is that good. We know he's that good, and he showed that off in this series. The Smolder, the Ezreal, both looked really good. Smolder's really not getting play anywhere in the world right now, so it's nice to see this team want to invest into trying to win those late game team fights alongside the Corki. I think that this draft is more punishable by a better team, but they were able to get away with it, and they dominated game number 2 as well. Just a really clean, good series. I wouldn't say that 100 Thieves got rolled. I think it was closer than that. I think that there was at least some fight in them individually in terms of their performances, but I would say that Dig was definitely better. It wasn't this series where it felt like, oh, 100 Thieves is, competing toe-to-toe. It really felt like Dig was winning, just not by, like, a crazy amount. They didn't slaughter them. They just were better. Jensen was also huge in this series, and he's picking up right where he left off in the spring split. He got scapegoated in the finals. He got scapegoated at MSI. I talked about it a lot on this channel. He was an MVP finalist for me in the spring split in terms of his regular season performance. People forget just how good he was for FlyQuest in the regular season as a carry, and he's come over here to Dignitas and really kind of just kept that pace going. I mean, it's not been perfect. Obviously, that first series against Cloud9 wasn't perfect from Dig, but this was an amazing series against the reigning MVP who just got Player of the Week in week number 1. So I feel pretty good about Jensen. Jensen Sven could be one of the scarier carry duos in the entire league. Licorice, Spica, Isles, they were all really good here. I think there's going to be, some finger pointing if this team starts to move in a negative direction towards some of these players, but for now, Jensen and Sven are doing more than enough to win this team games, even if everybody else is, a little bit slower. I think Spica was much better here, by the way, than he was against Cloud9, is something to note. And then for 100 Thieves on the other side, this is more, I guess, what you could expect from 100 Thieves. They are a team that's going to do really well when they're taking advantage of other teams' mistakes because they are so difficult to draft against, because they are so versatile. They really open up a lot of different possibilities for themselves, and it means unprepared or, teams that aren't talented enough to be able to win in multiple matchups. Those kinds of teams are not going to do particularly well into teams like 100 Thieves, but when you play a team like Dignitas, who is more than willing to try and meet that aggression with more aggression, they have the talent to be able to keep up. It's going to be a bit more difficult for 100 Thieves to get those same kinds of advantages. Quid is actually going to get my dud of the series here. It just didn't feel like he had any pressure into Jensen, who just was better than him across both of the games here. The Corki was massive in the back half of these games. The Yone Talia, you got to be able to push the tempo on that early, especially in game number 1, and it just didn't happen. Like, you are the entirety of the pressure in game number 1, and he just wasn't aggressive enough. He wasn't able to win 1v1 in the mid lane hard enough, and that's something we've seen from Quid in the past, as I talked about with him coming over from Gen G Challengers. On Gen G, he was this high-resource mid laner who was given basically everything that team had in the Challengers League and was expected to carry games, and when he was given the opportunity to do that last split, he looked really good, but we saw what happens when he has to play a lower resource style or when things aren't going well on the map in 2023, where he had to play with Doublelift, who was going to take a lot of the resources, and he looked a lot worse. And so I do think Quid is probably a bit more one-dimensional than he gets credit for. That one dimension is still fine, but, teams like Dignitas can exploit that. Meech, Ayla, they were fine, they were whatever. Sniper, I think, had a deceptively bad series. He played really poor in the 1v1s against Licorice on the top side, and River was trying his best to keep pressure up on the side of 100 Thieves, but there just wasn't a ton he could do after all his lanes lost. And so for 100T, this is more of what I expected. Again, I saw some people claiming they were for sure top 3, top 4. I hope this kind of puts that conversation to rest. I had a feeling they'd be sitting a lot closer to 5, and that seems to be where they are going to land here. And then for Dig on the other side, this is a top 4 team. This is going to be a team that competes for a world spot. I know that we didn't know how they were going to perform. This is a bunch of players who haven't been playing in a little while, getting together and, trying to form a pseudo super team. And at least for now, it's looking pretty good. We'll see how they continue to progress, but the vibes seem absolutely immaculate, and that's huge. The communication seems really good. Hopefully they can keep up this level of form, because how they played here was really, really good. And then moving on now to day number 2. We are halfway through the week already, and we kick day 2 off with a matchup between FlyQuest and NRG. that FlyQuest is going to pick up a 2-1 series win, and this was a must-win for Fly after how bad Energy looked in week number 1. You had to be able to come out here and just beat them. I would have preferred you not lose game number 2. That definitely would have given me a bit more confidence in this team, but at the end of the day, they still walked out of here with the win, and both of their wins were very solid. They never really felt like they were in danger in either of those games. They took advantage of their opponent's weaknesses very well, and so I'm not going to be freaked out by this win for FlyQuest or by the lack of dominance in this series from FlyQuest. I still think this is a good showing for Energy, though. I am starting to get a bit scared. Yes, you won game number 2, and that's a good sign. Like, at least you're able to win games against good teams, but there are some real issues on this team. I don't think any of the 5 players have started off this split well at all. I know it's only the first 2 series. They've only played 5 games, and so I'm not going to try to jump to conclusions about what this team could accomplish. They've been slow starters in the past. Even their summer split championship last year was preceded by a really slow start to the regular season, and so I'm not going to freak out and say this team can't rebound, but with a shorter regular season, the fact that it's only single round robin, you got to start stepping it up quick. If you lose another series, then the best you can probably do is like 3rd or 4th in terms of record, and so you got to start picking it up now. For FlyQuest, though, player of the series for me is going to go to Inspired in the jungle. He was definitely the most valuable player in that 3rd and final game, and that's really what tipped it over the edge for me. He was great on the Zyra. The Zyra in particular was just something that neither team really had a strong answer to. I've said multiple times on this channel that I don't think that Zyra is that good, that I think she is pretty exploitable. I've been proven wrong. She has honestly just been super successful at multiple levels of competition, and so at this point, yeah, like go play Zyra if you feel like you can control the map super easily. That's going to look great. I do think that there were some problems with how Contracts played her. It didn't feel like he was super comfortable, and we'll talk about Contracts. He did a lot of good things in this series. He did quite a few bad things in this series, but Inspired, for the most part, was more consistent, especially in that 3rd game where the Zyra just completely took over, was the one running it. So he's going to get player of the series for that. I think Quad played better here in week 2 than he did in week 1. I think that is a positive sign. Quad needs to really start developing into that carry that I think they were really hoping for. One of the big reasons why they brought him in was to get some better synergy coming out of the middle of the map, to get somebody that was going to play a bit more aggressive in terms of the laning, and I think we saw more of that in this series than what we saw out of him in week number 1, which is definitely a good sign. Tristana, that's kind of the pick that you want to see. Corki, a little bit less so. He's not really somebody that wants to just kind of play super safe. He wants to try to push forward. He's not really like a super selfless player. I'm not going to try to sit here and call him selfish. I just don't think his macro is perfect. He's not always going to be in a position where he's going to help his jungler or help for skirmishes or things like that. That's not really his style, really a player play style wise that I like to compare Quad to, and obviously this player's playing poor right now, so think of it in a playstyle sense, is Scout over in the LPL. If you followed Scout's career, I think Quad playstyle-wise is pretty similar, where he does want quite a few resources in the early to mid game because he does like to team fight really heavily as the game continues to go along, but he's not really going to want to do it through skirmishes. He's not somebody that really wants to play this game with a bunch of action early on. He wants to be able to control his 1v1. He wants to be able to just kind of win on his own in the middle of the map and then translate that to success elsewhere and hope that the rest of the team can really fulfill that role. I think he was much more of that here in the 2nd series than he was in the 1st. Masu and Busio I thought were good. Masu had a really good series in my opinion. I think that he's almost underrated in terms of the performance he put out here in week number 2, and Bwipo was generally fine as well. Dokla made a litany of mistakes over the course of this series, and Bwipo was definitely the more stable top laner. It's a good win for FlyQuest. I'm still not sold that this team is going to be perfect. I'm still not even sold their top 3. Honestly, there's something, there's a lot of things that have to be proven to me about FlyQuest that I have yet to really just kind of fully buy in on, but at least for now, they're 1-1, which is where they probably should be at this point. And then for Energy on the other side, they have real issues. Like, this team is really struggling in a lot of pretty key areas. Their solo laners were horrendous in this series. Dokla's going to get dead of the series because at least Palafox had some positive plays in game number 2, but Palafox was arguably worse in their losses, especially game number 3. Dokla was getting caught out in a lot of really bad situations. His 1v1ing has really deteriorated. Like, I don't know what to say other than that he is losing a lot harder now than he ever was. A couple of years ago, even last year, there just really isn't a lot of bright spots to look at for Dokla in terms of his performances. I think some of the negative plays are less his fault and more just kind of the team's fault. He's kind of covering for Palafox and FBI's mistakes, even Contracts' mistakes in those situations, and sometimes he's the one that has to pay the price in terms of his KDA, but that doesn't save the fact that his laning is horrible and that he is really not doing anything positive for the team, even if not every negative play that he's making matchmaking is entirely his fault. But Palafox was really bad in their losses this series. The Tristana, like I said, in game 3, the Yone in game number 1 just got completely outplayed by Quad, was really never relevant in the laning phase, and that's really disappointing. It's just not something that you can get away with. Palafox has been one of the more consistent mid laners in the LCS for the last couple of years. That is not translated to 2024, where he has taken a major step back. I do think there were good moments from Jungle Bot. I think that is kind of at least some kind of bright spot. I think Contracts had a couple of really positive moments. The scoreline is okay. I think he also had a couple of really negative ones. It didn't feel like he was super comfortable on Zyra. And of course, missing Diana ultimate is really tragic, but you can live with that because he was making positive plays elsewhere on the map. And then for FBI and Huhi, FBI made a pretty critical mistake towards the end of game number 3 where he just walks in and basically dies on his own. And, Dokla has to die for him, and it looks really bad for Dokla, but it's really FBI's fault. Outside of that, I thought he was generally fine. I think that his laning is still really, really good, and I think that is something that could potentially be taken advantage of more by Energy in terms of the game plan. Huhi, I think, is still very good in lane and is still trying to make plays outside of lane. Huhi was generally fine in this series. I think the bot lane is getting more hate and more flack than they deserve. I've seen some people saying that they are, one of the bottom 2 to 3 bot lanes in the LCS. I just do not believe that. That's not the tape that I've seen. Yes, they're making mistakes, but so is every other bot lane. I think we're being overly critical on Energy's bot lane. I think a lot of analysts are being overly critical. I think they are not the problem. Right now, to me, solo lanes are the problem for Energy. Dokla and Palafox are just not playing at a level that is LCS caliber. There is nothing else to say. They have to get back on board because it is not working right now. And for FlyQuest on the other side, again, it's a nice win, but there are still a lot of things that I want to see cleaned up. Losing to Energy is certainly not ideal. Top lane's not been nearly the strength that it was in the spring split. I don't think Quad has adapted to the team nearly as well as maybe they would have hoped early on. There are changes. Communication is going to come over time. This team is going to get more consistent over time, and I'm not going to try to freak out and, say that they are doomed right now, but this is a team that is sitting at 1-1 with expectations of being top 2, and I just don't know if I feel like they are comfortably even close to that right now. And then moving on now to our final series of the week here, our second series of day 2, and it's maybe the most expected outcome of the whole week. It's Team Liquid taking on Shopify Rebellion, and of course, Team Liquid 2-0'd them. This was not a close series. Neither of these games were close at all. Shopify is the worst team in the LCS, and it's not even really all that disputable at this point. Them losing to Immortals is worst case scenario for them, a team that had a ton of potential and a ton of hype, at least from me going into the split. It's all just evaporated. I had them in my top 5 in the preseason. That has not aged well, although I think a lot of people had them in a similar position at number 5. And so, this team has just collapsed. Every decision that they've made, every new player that they brought in seemingly has made the team worse. And, we'll talk about, B-Voy being good, and that's really it. That's the only thing kind of going right for them at the moment. But Team Liquid is still very good. Again, highest floor in the LCS, and it's not even remotely close. There are so many rumors of them just dominating scrims, and I'm not surprised. Not only do you have a ton of hard workers on this team like Impact and Core and Yan, who are notorious, even APA, for taking scrims super seriously and being really hard workers off the rift, out of game, off stage. That's a really good thing for Team Liquid, and you add on top of that Spawn as a coach, and of course, this team is overperforming expectations. Of course, they are overperforming talent levels. It's just a really good recipe for success in a league like North America, and they continue to really show up and show out. I think the bot lane has really solidified themselves as maybe the best in the West. Yan and Core are unbelievable. Yan's going to get player of the series for me. I think you could very realistically give this to Core JJ as well. I do think it should go to one of those two. Shout out to Impact. He was really good in this series, and Broadcast gave him player of the series, but to me, it's either Yan or Core. I think the bot lane was definitely the most important part for Team Liquid, as they have been for the entirety of this year. Yan has cemented himself as the number 1 ADC in North America, with Berserker not really kind of starting off this split as hot as maybe you would want, not being that superstar carry. He was really the only person that could theoretically stand in Yan's way at all, and Yan has been just as good as he was in spring, just as good as he was in playoffs, and that's huge for Liquid. Him and Core are just unbelievable. There was that interview in the postgame where APA said, they're the best solution Nami, and Core's yeah, probably the best solution Nami in the West. I think that's fair. To me, and I tweeted this out, it's not close. There's no bot lane in the West that is even remotely on the same level in terms of consistency as Yan and Core in terms of what they've shown this year. I think you could say that Rahel and Luan could get there for SK Gaming over in the LEC. That's really the only bot lane that I think is contestable. But yeah, Yan and Core are the best bot lane in the West right now, and I think they continue to show that off. B-Boy is certainly not a weak link for Shopify. He's the only good player on the team, and Yan and Core really obliterated them on Lucian Nami in game number 2. But it's not like it was just them. Impact was really good. Fake God has really struggled at the LCS level, has really not been able to make that transition, and Impact, definitely the kind of player that can take advantage of a player who might not be as experienced or quite as comfortable at this level. Looked really good. I'm really happy this team is just spamming Maokai and, things like Sejuani and Maokai, because that's still, in my opinion, the most consistent way to win games. I understand that AP junglers are really strong right now, and trust me, like, you can dominate games on AP junglers, but that doesn't mean that Maokai, Sejuani, Ivern, and things like that are less valuable. It just means that there is more diversity in the meta, and I know a lot of junglers just want to play something aggressive for once. They're so used to playing these tank engaged champions, they want to move to something that's going to be a little bit more proactive, a little bit more carry oriented in the late game. I understand that ideology, but spamming Maokai has really worked for this Team Liquid team. Some people are worried about their lack of adaptation towards this new patch. What I say is that it doesn't matter. Play what you're good at. Teams are going to be able to only ban out a few things. Like, you're going to get most of the things that you're good at if you're Team Liquid. I'm not worried about them going to an international tournament and not being versatile enough to be able to keep up. We already saw at MSI that they can play a lot of different things. APA continues to be really good. He's had an amazing start to the split so far. Impact, Yon, Core, they were all good. Team Liquid is the highest floor team in the league. They're the team that I would least expect to just flame out at this point. I feel very, very good about where they're at, and it does feel like they are ahead of everybody else right now, even if I don't know they will be there at the end of the year. And then for Shopify, they're so far behind. They are so much further behind, everybody else than anyone in the LCS. It is truly absurd, and their players are just not playing well. Their new addition this midseason, Tomio in the jungle, has really started slow. He's going to get dead of the series here. He just does not feel comfortable in this meta. He did not feel comfortable on Zyra. He did not feel comfortable on Brand. Obviously, people are memeing on him because he said on pros that he doesn't read the patch notes, and that's probably not a good look when you're playing for the worst team in the entire league. That being said, he simply has to be better. I know that, it's going to take him some time to get used to playing at the LCS level. This is his first stint in the LCS. He's never played games at this level before, and so you do want to give him some time to potentially get adjusted and to potentially get comfortable, but it has not been a good start. The rest of this team wasn't much better. Zazel, I think, really struggled this series on engagers, was constantly going in without the rest of his team. Insanity's scoreline looks good, but he definitely played worse than that scoreline would entail. I think it was somewhere in the middle of maybe where he's getting reputation-wise and, where he actually, what his scoreline looks like. I think he was fine, maybe one of the more interesting players on Shopify in this series, but certainly not one that I think was pushing them towards a win. A lot of mistakes coming from the middle of the map, and like I said, Fake God is just nothing in the top lane right now for Shopify. This team is just playing way below their skill level in the same way that Team Liquid is playing above their skill level to be one of the best teams in the West. I think Shopify is playing so below their skill level to be by far the worst team in the LCS, and that's a really disappointing thing to say. They just don't really have anything going for them. B-Boy is a good player, and I think, hopefully he gets a better circumstance, maybe next year. I don't know what's going to happen with the league, shrinking a couple of teams, but Shopify is likely going to be in the league. If they can build around B-Boy, then I do think that that's going to be fine for them, but the rest of this team just doesn't feel like they are good enough right now for the LCS, and Team Liquid definitely abuse that. I mean, they're one of the best teams in the West, full stop. Like, they are right up there with anybody else, with G2, and, they beat Fnatic at MSI, who's dominating the LEC right now. There's a lot of things to like from Team Liquid. I'm not guaranteeing you that they are going to win another championship because, again, this is a team that has a really high floor, and I wouldn't say a low ceiling. Their ceiling is good, but their ceiling to me isn't as high as some of the other teams in the LCS if everything were to go right, if other teams were to get their shit together. But because they are so coherent, because their practice is so sane, and their macro is so good, and their ability to win lane is so strong, they are going to be able to beat any team that does not have full control of the map and doesn't know exactly what they want to do in the mid game, and that already raises the bar so high for everybody else. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCS Summer Split Week 2 overview and analysis video up on the screen. Now you're going to see the updated standings after 2 weeks of action. Of course, any ties will just be broken alphabetically. I'm not trying to show any crazy favoritism here, but the standings have returned a bit to normalcy after 100 Thieves and Immortals were tied in first place at the end of week number 1. We expected things to kind of change going into this week, and I think a lot of things went as anticipated, at least in my eyes, and we can go over, I would typically say, the risers and the fallers in my power rankings, which you can see on the right side, power rank. Personally, where I power rank these teams from number 1 to number 8, change how that has changed from last week to this week, but no changes. I really don't feel like there is any need for changes. Everything went as anticipated this week. I don't think any team looked better or worse than I was anticipating. The only team that I'm waiting to see more out of is really FlyQuest, sitting at number 3. I think Dignitas has looked better in terms of their games and their series so far, but I would expect FlyQuest to be the better team as we continue to move along, and so I'm not going to move anybody up or down. Let me know if you agree or disagree with that. This is going to be one of the shorter standing sections that we've done because there is no changes, but let me know if you agree with no changes. Let me know if you think Energy should be in the bottom 2. Let me know if you think that, 100 Thieves still deserves to be in top 4. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions on whatever, if you agree or you disagree with my lack of changes, but I just don't think anything really surprised me this week, and therefore I'm not going to make any changes to my power rankings because of that. But moving on to my player of the week and my dud of the week here in week number 2, player of the week is going to go to Sven, the AD carry for Dignitas. He has really readapted to his AD carry role very well. He was pretty good in week number 1, even in their loss, and he was excellent here in week number 2. Dignitas looks like they're going to be a contender for top 3, which is all we could have really asked for them, and Sven's going to be a big reason for that. If he can continue to play like a top 1 or 2 AD carry in the LCS, which is super possible for him, then this team is going to be just fine. I really like what this team could potentially do if they continue to click in this way. The vibes do seem immaculate for Dignitas right now. And then the honorable mentions, the runners-up, Yon, the AD carry for Team Liquid, the best AD carry in North America right now, especially in terms of the performances he's given over the course of this year. He has just been electric. The Lucian Nami is so dominant for them, and they can play really anything. They can play lane dominant, carries and really just destroy people in the mid game. They can play scalers and still win lane. That way they can translate that into team fights. It really is a pretty versatile bot lane, and that's what makes Team Liquid so dangerous to have to prep for. And then Blabber, the jungler for Cloud9, who just completely out-jungled Armeo on the other side of this matchup. There were quite a few choices for Dud of the Week. Player of the Week was a little bit more limited in my eyes. I don't think anybody really stood out as being dominant in the same way, but still a really good week for Sven, and I felt like that was a pretty easy choice for Player of the Week here in week 2. And then my dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Dokla, the top laner for Energy. Just not a very good week for Dokla, and not a very good start of the split for Dokla. Again, he is maybe getting scapegoated a bit more than, he should because of some of the plays that he has. He's kind of covering for his teammates in some of the circumstances, but that doesn't explain away everything. It doesn't explain him getting destroyed 1v1 in lane. It doesn't explain him not really influencing the game in any positive way at all either. Like, just because not all of the bad plays are his fault doesn't mean that the lack of good plays is suddenly so much better, right? Dokla is still having a really horrible start to the split, and Energy is really in freefall mode. They have to get back on track this week. They have the easiest game that they could possibly have to get back on track, and they have to be able to win it. There were a lot of honorable mentions for this. Usually I don't mention, but like Tomio was horrible this week. Armeo was horrible this week. There were a lot of options for Dud of the Week, a lot more than Player of the Week, unfortunately. Hopefully that turns around for the LCS in the coming weeks, but Dud of the Week is going to go to Dokla. Player of the Week is going to go to Sven, and that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comment section below. Who do you think is too high? Who do you think is too low? If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCS. We cover all 4 of the major regions every single week on this channel, as well as the NACL, Tier 2 down here in North America. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.